inquiry, saying his version of events, trying to rebut some of the statements made by the acting CEO of the acting head of GCIS, Phumla Williams, a few weeks ago. Well, joining us now is our senior reporter Mzwandile Mbeje, who's been following this state capture inquiry for us and has been there today. Mzwai, let's start with Barbara Hogan. Did anything significant come through in her testimony today?
Peter, what could have perhaps come out that was maybe new today from Barbara Hogan was that she possibly herself, together with her partner Ahmed Kathrada, they possibly could have been funded by the Guptas on the trip where Ahmed Kathrada had been invited to give a speech in India. Though at the time they obviously had no idea. They thought everything had been done by the Indian High Commission. But upon examining this kind of situation, and Barbara Hogan saying she actually got a call about 6 months ago querying this kind of a trip. So she says when you look at the fine print, you do see that there is a name of the Sahara Computers, which is owned by the Guptas. So that was quite significant, though I don't think it has any material effect to the evidence with regards to what is happening to the state capture. Remember, throughout the 3 days that she's been here talking about the issues at the state-owned enterprises, so she never really implicated directly the Guptas like perhaps many before had done. And perhaps another thing that was said by Barbara Hogan was that the first inkling that SAA route between Johannesburg and Mumbai was going to be cancelled. She got that when she was in India in 2010, accompanying the former president on a state visit there, because she says there were rumors that the route was going to be cancelled in favor of Jet Airways, the Indian airline. So she says she then checked with the chairperson of the board then, Cheryl Carolas, who said there were no plans to do that, but went on to say, well, it must be Jet Airways that is putting this kind of pressure. So that is how the evidence really, Peter, of Barbara Hogan went today.
And when we look back at evidence in totality, I think in her own words, she was saying that, look, she wasn't presenting evidence in terms of state capture, but more that she was under pressure, she was at odds with the president over governance and procedure, and that perhaps later on, looking back in retrospect, maybe some of these things started to make sense, but certainly at the time, she had no suspicion whatsoever that any kind of state capture project was underway.
Absolutely. I think the thread of her argument, or rather of her presentation here, was that there was a lot of interference when it comes to the appointment of the board members of the state-owned enterprises and the senior executives. So she says, I mean, when she looks back now, she can then make sense of why perhaps some of these interferences from various people, she's fingering the former president, she's fingering some of her former colleagues, some of the people in the tripartite alliance. So she says now she can then make sense of why all that kind of pressure was put on her. Essentially, what she is saying, Peter, was that this kind of interference really could have made it possible for the state capture to take root. But on the whole, as I said before, she didn't really directly implicate the Gupta family. But some of the people who she says were actually sometimes time and again whose names appeared, you can see now they were somehow in one way or the other related, or rather linked to the Guptas.
And then enter Mzwandile Manyi, who said, listen, I have to have my version told. And there was a bit about debate about how much he was going to discuss and whether he was going to be cross-examined. But then he did take to the stand. Take us through that.
Mzwanele Manyi, remember, perhaps before I get into how he got to then present his evidence, remember Barbara Hogan did earlier in her affidavit mention the name of Mzwanele Manyi, but of course she withdrew it when she was alerted to it. But Mzwanele Manyi is having none of it. He is basically saying this is part of an orchestrated strategy to, well, tarnish his name. So he wants a public apology. And I think that will not be difficult really for Ms. Hogan perhaps to do, because the fact that she withdrew that name from the affidavit does suggest that she recognizes that perhaps it was a mistake. But when it comes to today's events, Peter, it was quite interesting. Mzwanele Manyi was initially scheduled to be here on the 23rd, that is on Friday next week. But the commission contacted him saying there is an opening today, so if he is available, so he could come, because there were issues that he also wanted to clarify, and particularly that issue of the SMS that he sent when Phumla Williams was giving her evidence. So when he was here, and then the other issues arose from the commission, and then the commission decided that, well, it may not be possible to give Mr. Manyi a platform. Maybe he should come back on the 23rd, because they had other issues that they want to raise with him. And then he expressed his unhappiness, going as far as addressing the chairperson of the commission, saying he had been told that there is an opening, and then he had come for specifically 2 issues here. And one of the issues was to address that issue of him sending a text to Phumla Williams during the testimony, and of course to give his version of events. After a few arguments, as you have noted, and then the judge and the legal team of the commission agreed that, well, he will be given the opportunity to state his case and, of course, respond really to that text that he sent. So, yes, he did do that, and as you know, we have just finished now. We had to go over about a few minutes, but he did do as they agreed with the commission.
So he made some quite startling allegations in his testimony today. Millions of rand being paid for services not delivered, and also the splitting of invoices. And this points either to fraud or serious misdoing.
It's quite interesting, Peter. I think what really he wanted to say here, because, I mean, even when I spoke to him earlier, he really did indicate to us that he wanted to speak, because he said all he had was nothing but the truth and the facts. So in his testimony, Peter, Mr. Manyi basically told us that before he got to GCIS, so there was massive corruption. He even likened the corruption which he said he found there to mini VPS. So you can imagine at the moment when anyone speaks about VPS, you just think of massive looting. So where he basically said he found where processes really were not followed, and the person at the center of all of that, he pointed his finger at Miss Phumla Williams. Remember, Phumla Williams had her day here, also saying sort of things about Mr. Manyi. So it was the time for Mr. Manyi really to either rebut or set the record straight. So basically what he is saying is that Miss Williams went as far as signing off some of the documents really that he was not authorized to do. He actually says, so if you signed off on something that had 1 million or more, then Treasury would flag that amount. But what they would do, they would make sure that every amount that they are signing off, it's below 1 million, so that Treasury could not pick it up. He says he actually stopped a 26 million rand loot that was about to happen, but by the time he stopped that, already 7.5 had already been sent to has already been signed off. So you can see that his intention here was to come and expose what he says is massive corruption there. I mean, he even speaks about some of the contracts that were entered into where 64 million rand really went unaccounted for, and Treasury did not do anything about it, besides even having been notified about it. It was quite interesting, Peter. But as you know, if you have presented your case at this commission and then you have implicated certain individuals, they have a right to apply to the chairperson to seek to cross-examine you. But as soon as you want to do that, you must put your own version so that your version as well could be tested.
Mzwanele, that's where we're going to leave it for the time being. No doubt we're getting more reports from you a little bit later on, and that's where we're going to leave it for the time being. So a very eventful day at the State Capture Inquiry today, and Palesa, I guess this inquiry is going to be watched quite closely as things continue to unravel in each testimony.
All right, so I suppose we're taking a break.